everybody. Welcome to the Fired Up with CJ show. Today we have Steve Taylor, and we're talking about his book, Spiritual Science. Hooray!
There it is.
So welcome, Steve.
Hi, it's great to be with you.
Yeah, I have to admit that I'm a little bit intimidated by science. I was never really good at science, so these kind of conversations freak me out a little bit. So please be patient with me as I
Yeah,
go
no
through my
problem. No problem.
neuroses. You can use your experience. I know that you're a professor at Leeds Beckett University in positive and transpersonal psychology, so maybe you can actually help me through my phobias as I go through my science phobia.
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
try. I'll try. Do my best.
Okay, so I want to ask you spiritual science. I have so many questions. What were the questions that you walked in or were trying to figure out? So usually scientists have hypothesis with respect to what that they're trying to prove or disprove with data or facts. What were you hoping to find out?
Well, I'm really trying to explain the way the world works and to explain the way human beings work. And my starting point is really that the normal model of science doesn't actually work.
Hmm.
That it doesn't actually explain the world very well. You know, there are so many aspects of human behavior which are not explainable in terms of normal science, such as consciousness. Nobody really knows what consciousness is or where it comes from. And things like near-death experiences, spiritual experiences, psychic experiences. In terms of normal science, these things are brushed aside and disregarded and dismissed. But
Hmm.
I want to, I think we need to understand these experiences. We need to integrate them into science. We need to create a new kind of science which can make sense of the world and make sense of these experiences.
Yeah, so I was just reading a book on Tantra, and it was talking about the origins of the universe. And it was saying in this book, um, and I can't remember, I should be able to quote, which book it was. I think it was the Vedas. But they were saying that we have seven worlds um, in within ourselves and seven worlds outside of ourselves. And so there's and in the Vedic in that particular practice they talk about a psychic body with chakras, a whole system things within ourselves, and then these like seven layers of reality outside ourselves. I'm wondering whether, because I assume that all these have to do with spiritual, psychic, near-death
Hmm.
experiences. Um, what did you find out? What sources did you look at the cosmology of the world? Like, how is it? What is in the world, and how is it created?
Well, what I'm saying in my book, in spiritual science, is that the essential reality of the world is spirit. In terms of normal science, the essential reality is matter,
Mm-hmm.
and everything should be explainable in terms of the interactions of matter.
Mm-hmm.
So, in normal scientific terms, the mind is seen as a product of the brain. You know, all of our thoughts, all of our feelings, all of our experiences are supposedly produced by brain cells interacting and working together to produce these experiences. But that doesn't really make sense. You know, the mind has such a big influence on the body, and the mind has such a big influence on the brain that the mind has to be something more than the products of matter. I think, the mind has a spiritual source. You know, the
Mm.
source of our consciousness comes from spirit itself. So what I'm saying is that there is a fundamental spiritual essence in the universe, which is everywhere. You know, it fills the space around us. It pervades every object in the universe, every atom, every being, every animal, every human being is full of spirit. The
Mm-hmm.
whole of our being is pervaded with spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think of spirit as the essence of the universe, as a fundamental universal property, then things begin to make a lot more sense. As I say, you can explain the human mind, you can explain human consciousness, and you can also explain spiritual experiences, near-death experiences, psychic experiences. Also, things like altruism, you know, the experience of empathy, which leads to altruistic acts. You know, when we alleviate each other's suffering, that all comes from the fundamental interconnection of our shared spirit.
So if I were to read a lot of the spiritual books, the theories that I see, and there's lots of different theories, but instead of matter, there's a sense that everything is energy and or spirit, and that they're intertwined. In the practice that
Yeah.
I do, energy, which is Shakti, life force, prana, chi, whatever however you
Mm,
describe
mm,
it, is the fundamental energy that flows through all of us, and within all of that is consciousness. So that's the
mm-hmm.
theory. And when these, spiritual masters from all different sorts of religions, go into sitting in a cave and try to understand the nature of the universe, all of them kind of come up with the same thing. It's all energy. It's a combination of energy and consciousness. So, um, what what did you find in terms of what the science says about those concepts, that it's not just matter, our physical body, and when you
Mm.
and just to go back, you had said mind. When you say mind, it's not like the brain that is my cognitive abilities. Did you mean the higher mind, or did you mean like CJ's brain, Steve's brain? I just want to clarify terms too when you refer to
Yeah,
mind.
well, I would say there are three essential terms, in my model.
Okay.
And first of all, there is the brain, which consists of 100 billion cells, and which work together in incredibly complex ways.
Mm-hmm.
But then there is the mind, and the mind, as I see it, I guess it's quite a psychological concept I have of the mind. It's basically just the psychological functions we have of memory,
Ah,
um, cognitive functions, attention, concentration, information processing. These are all mental processes. They're
right,
all properties of our minds.
right.
But then we have spirit. The third thing is spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And spirit is what we experience when our minds are quiet. In a
Mm,
deep meditation, for example,
mm-hmm.
when your thoughts slow down and space seems to fill you inside. And then you get in touch with your essential spirit, the part
Mm,
of you which is connected to everything else which exists, your own spirit, which is connected to the spirit of the universe. And you can feel that connection in a deep meditation. You can feel that oneness.
mm-hmm.
And it feels almost as if you're at the source of things. And you are at the source of things because that spirit inside you is the spirit of the whole universe.
Mm-hmm.
And in my model, I believe that spirit precedes the universe, that the universe arises from spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So spirit is, in a very real sense, the source of all material things and the source of being itself.
Yeah, and a lot of all the spiritual texts say kind of the same thing. It's
Hmm.
basically, so in the practice that I'm in, they talk about human beings having individuated points of consciousness. So,
Yeah.
the spirit comes, forms CJ, an individuated point of consciousness. So,
Hmm.
what's the scientific proof that any of this is true? That your theory, the spiritual people sitting in caves that come up with this whole cosmology, and that it's spirit and energy, and yes, there is matter. And I would argue that
Yeah.
what I think when I read spiritual texts, they would describe matter as projections from our mind to the external world, creating a reality and a consensus reality with other people. So, what does science say about all
Well,
this?
well, yeah, there are two aspects of it. First of all, there are so many different phenomena which can't be explained in material terms, like
Right,
consciousness, for example.
right.
Nobody, people have been trying for decades to explain how the brain could produce consciousness,
Hmm.
but there's a kind of growing consensus that that's too simplistic, that the brain doesn't actually produce consciousness. And my belief is that consciousness actually, well, first of all, fundamental consciousness is equates with spirit. So when I talk about consciousness in a fundamental sense, I'm talking about spirit.
Okay.
So so our own consciousness is a kind of influx of the spirit of the universe.
Hmm.
And the function of the brain is not to produce consciousness, but to receive consciousness from outside us and
Hmm.
to canalize it into our own being. So the brain is a bit like a radio transmitter. It sort of picks up
Hmm.
consciousness around us, and all of the billions of cells in our brain they work together to canalize consciousness into our own individual being,
So,
and that produces our own mind. The combination of spirit and the brain, spirit working through the brain, produces our own mind and our own individual spirit.
okay, so that spirit combined, or we have this receptor of the brain.
Mhm.
It's receiving information from spirit or higher consciousness, and the combination of our brain and our mind, which you talk as psychological processes. That's
Mhm.
what creates Steve and CJ, different individuated
Yeah,
points. Okay,
that's right.
so what's your proof that any of this is true?
Well, yeah, proof is a difficult thing. What I try to do in the book, I go through a lot of different concepts, a lot of different um, aspects of science, and explain how materialism, the standard model of science, cannot explain these phenomena. But from a spiritual point of view, they can be explained. Our consciousness can be explained. Altruism can be explained. The influence of the mind over the body, the amazing influence that our beliefs have on the functioning of our bodies, which you can see in the placebo effect, in psychogenesis, which is when the mind creates illnesses in the body, psychosomatic illnesses. The mind has a really powerful influence over the body. And that's because the mind is actually more fundamental than the body. The mind is not a product of the brain. The mind stems from spirit, from the essence, the spiritual essence of the universe. So it has a more, it's more subtle than the matter of the body, and therefore it has a powerful influence over the body. And yeah, and in terms of proof, we can move into the realm of quantum physics. And as I'm sure most of your listeners are aware, quantum physics is completely crazy. There was one physicist who said, if you think you understand quantum physics, you don't understand quantum physics, because everything just sort of breaks down at that level. But in the subatomic realm of quantum physics, and there doesn't seem to be any separateness. The idea of separateness, the idea of solidity, dissolves away. Literally, it dissolves away. So the notion of individual units, which are distinct from one another, literally dissolves into a fuzzy interconnectedness, where you can't separate particles even if they're miles away from each other. There's a phenomenon of
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah,
yeah,
what's the phenomenon called?
it's called entanglement, where if there are two particles which have interacted with each other at some point, maybe they've split off from a bigger particle, or maybe they've just collided at some point. Once they've interacted, it doesn't matter how far apart they are. They could be, hundreds of miles apart. Then they still behave as if they are interconnected. So they will move in parallel with each other. They will spin in opposite directions, or they will move simultaneously, as if they are aware of each other and as if they are interconnected. So yeah, and recent experiments. There was an experiment last year in China which showed that entanglement can occur up to distances of 700 kilometers,
Wow.
which is amazing. So it
Yeah, that
suggests that,
is.
yeah, so it suggests the quantum physics shows a fundamental interconnectedness. It shows that everything is part of the same network of being, if you like.
And
So
you
to
guys,
me,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, so to me that is proof, if you like, of this shared fundamental consciousness which we all arise from.
And so, because if everything is interconnected, are there certain types of connections that does it explain why certain people or certain things are more connected? Like just even simple things. Like let's go to human psychology. There are certain people that you resonate more with. There are friends that you have that you like, and people who are associates, and they're okay, but you don't like them. Did it say anything about why the types of connections that are formed and why some are stronger than others, and if so, why they're
Hmm. Hmm.
stronger?
If you move into the human realm, then I think one of our biggest issues as human beings is that we we may experience separateness. We may become alienated from our fundamental oneness, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as if we are all waves on the ocean,
Mm-hmm.
and we're all part of the ocean. If you're a wave, you are also part of the wholeness of the ocean. But as human beings, we forget that we're part of the ocean. We think of ourselves as autonomous waves that are pushing ourselves forward and that which have our own identity. So we tend to forget our connection to the whole ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that happens with animals. I don't think animals have the same sense of separateness as human
Mm.
beings. It seems
Yeah.
to be a very human phenomenon. And because we experience this separateness, it means that things like psychic experiences of telepathy, which arise from connectedness, that those are quite rare. They happen sometimes, but because we experience separateness, those experiences are quite rare.
Mm.
And spiritual experiences are fundamentally experiences of oneness,
Mm-hmm.
experiences in which our separateness dissolves away
Mm-hmm.
and we experience our fundamental oneness.
Mm.
But again, because separateness is our normal state, we don't have those experiences very often.
Right. And we don't have necessarily the proof that we have that we are interconnected only comes through quantum physics, and that when you try to split a particle, you're unable to do it. And in fact, that there are particles that can be connected 700 kilometers away, which is proof that
Hmm.
like so that's basically your proof that we are connected. It comes from quantum physics that there is one unifying.
Yeah, partly.
And
Yeah.
what other kinds of
Well,
proof?
the notion of proof, I think evidence comes from building a case. I'm trying to build a case like a lawyer is building a case.
Okay.
So I'm building a case partly based on spiritual experiences because they suggest connection, oneness. I'm building a
Like
case.
what else would explain these spiritual experiences except
Yeah,
that there has to be something else that's fundamentally driving it,
yeah.
which is
I'm saying
subjective.
that sometimes this try to explain spiritual experiences in terms of brain activity, unusual activity in the brain,
Hmm.
but that's nonsense. Spiritual experiences are experiences of our fundamental oneness. They're experiences in which separateness fades away. And the same is true of altruism, or empathy. Empathy
Hmm.
is basically an experience of connection to other human beings.
Hmm.
Now,
Hmm.
if you are feeling sad, and I feel your sadness, and I feel the impulse to do something to help you, to alleviate your sadness, that comes from our interconnection.
Hmm.
That would be impossible unless we were actually connected in some way.
Well,
Um,
but we could be trained culturally to respond. Like, I bump into you in the car and I say, "Oh, sorry." Like I'm just,
hmm.
"Oh, sorry." Like I just, and I'm not thinking about it. I'm just conditioned into saying sorry when I bump into a stranger in the tube or the subway or whatever you want to call it.
Possibly. But I think, the most extreme examples of altruism occur in crisis situations.
Hmm.
Like I live in Manchester in the UK. 2 years ago, there was a terrorist attack here in Manchester.
Hmm.
About 60 people died, I think. I can't quite remember the exact figure.
Mm.
But there was a paramedic who attended to the scene, and he said that, you know, beyond the terrible devastation and violence that he witnessed, the most amazing thing that he took away was the altruism which was on display.
Mm.
People were actually running back to the scene to help out. People
Oh.
were just comforting each other. They were trying to trying to help each other's injuries. He
Hmm.
was just amazed at the kind of instinctive kindness which was on display amongst all
Hmm.
this devastation.
Mm.
And those kind of crisis situations always bring out this instinctive altruism in
Mm.
people.
Hmm.
It's too instantaneous and instinctive to be culturally conditioned. It stems from, a sense of connection, a sense that we are fundamentally all one.
Hmm.
And if you suffer, I also suffer because I am you, you know.
Mm. Hmm.
And my impulse is to relieve your suffering.
Mm. So, as a psychologist, and positive psychology and all the things, I'm assuming you're studying about the phenomena of altruism and empathy, and that's what kind of thought. Well, how it can't just be our mind. that is
Mm.
our psychological condition. You're saying there had to be something else, which is what you started looking like. What else could it be? Oh, it could be spirit, and that's the only thing that could help you
Mm.
explain it. Is that what I'm? Am I understanding what you're
Partly,
saying?
yeah, partly. But I've also studied near-death experiences,
Yes. Uh huh.
which, as you know, that's when a person is clinically dead for a short time,
Mhm.
usually after a cardiac arrest.
Mhm.
And for a few seconds or a few minutes, even though they are clinically dead, they experience a continuation of consciousness. They witness the events in the operating theatre. They float away from their bodies. They sometimes meet deceased relatives. They float towards through the darkness towards a tunnel. But they also experience this tremendous sense of oneness. Just like in spiritual experiences, one of the most prominent characteristics of near-death experiences is this feeling that everything is connected and that
Mm.
you are part of this oneness. There's an
Mm.
incredible euphoria. The euphoria is so great that people are sometimes reluctant to go back,
Yes.
and they're sometimes even disappointed when they wake up. You know,
Yes, I've heard
um,
that
it-
several ways. I've actually, oddly enough, I know a lot of people that have almost died, and and I've heard this kind of phenomena over and over again that I'm sure you're familiar with. Jill, what is it? Jill Boy, what Boynton? What
oh,
is it?
Jill Bolt Taylor, is that
Bolt
right?
Taylor, yeah, who is basically is kind of like loses one half of her brain, and she's
Yeah.
just so in euphoria that she can't do things like call the phone to call the emergency because she's just in this state of oneness and euphoria. And then even Alexander, who was a neuroscientist from Duke, which is one of the big medical establishments here in the States, and he had said, people would say, no, nothing was happening in your brain. And he's like, yeah, I'm a neuroscientist. I know that, or a neurosurgeon, I think. He's like, I know, but I
Yeah.
can tell you that these are all these things that were happening. And so what I'm hearing you say is that, yeah, how else could you explain? Because there is no mind activity. If you actually look, if you actually
Yeah.
hook up to your brain, there's the null set. So how else would explain that phenomenon?
Yeah. The only way to explain it is to believe that consciousness is not, rooted in the brain. Consciousness is beyond the brain, and somehow it can exist without the brain.
Mm,
So it's not produced by the brain. It's something fundamental to the
mm.
universe.
So I know this is going to sound a little bit out of well, two things. One is there's this technology now that one is called Muse. I don't know whether you've seen it. It's like an electrodes that go across your forehead, and they look at the neuroactivity of your brain, and they have based on their research, there's like when your brain is in a high degree of awareness and focus, it gives a certain kind of signal. And then when your brain is in disharmony, it gives a different kind of signal. And so it knows what a meditative brain looks like, a meditative focused brain looks like, and it knows what a distracted meditation looks like.
Oh,
And
right.
so when you
Hmm.
get through a kind of disintegrated state. You're not one. You're kind of like, oh, I'm thinking about the laundry. I'm thinking about whatever. I'm thinking about my question for
Mm.
Steve today. It goes, it gives a little beep or it gives you a noise to tell you that you
Oh,
are
right.
off track. Similarly, HeartMath has something that's hooked to I haven't tried it, but it's hooked to the back of your ear. A friend of mine said when he's meditating, when his heart is in coherence, he has a certain sound that's made, and when his heart is outside of coherence, it has a similar little sound that gives you a sense of like you're out of coherence. Return back to oneness, So there are these tools that, in this case, they're kind of backward engineering. They're using your mind and your processes' ability to focus and process to get
Mm.
back into the spirit state. And I was wondering what your thoughts are about those because because you had said, so much like even Alexander, when they looked at his brain, it was like
Mm.
you're
Mm.
dead. Even there's nothing going on. And I may be paraphrasing this completely inaccurate, so please forgive me. Even, but there a lot of his scientist friends would say, "You're dead. There's nothing happening," but yet he
Yeah.
knew personally, experientially, something was happening. Okay, so there's a technology can't measure anything, and then you have technology that is like being input into your using your mind as a way of connecting with spirit. What are your thoughts about those kinds of products?
I think they can be, I'm not familiar with these products, but I think they can be useful. It reminds me of what used to be called biofeedback. Do you remember
Yeah.
biofeedback?
Yeah, a
Yeah,
long time ago, there were these
yeah. I think
machines
that
that
was
were
sort
on your
of,
computer, and you'd put them on your finger, and
mm,
like, yeah.
mm.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that's right. You use biofeedback to control your blood pressure. You'd realize if your blood pressure was high, and you'd allow yourself to relax to bring your blood pressure low.
Yeah.
So you have increased control over your autonomic nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I think basically these things are just we're just using them as markers to become aware of the nature of our mental activity. So
Right.
it's useful in that sense. The technology is not interfering with our mental activity. It's showing us what's happening so that we can respond to it, and so
Hmm.
that we can correct imbalances, or we can move away from that distracted state. So yeah, I think that's fine. These things could be useful.
Yeah. And so, do you think though that there's any risk when you actually have these products that are training you to become? I mean, there's something weird about it. Like, can we learn how to become without these products? It's just like the
Yeah.
equivalent of, we have a navigational system in our car. And my children, like literally, if I'm like, oh, go to downtown, they're like, I need to put in my, like, what's the address? I need to
Mhm.
put it into Google Maps. Like, they can't even figure out how to drive anymore. Is there a risk that with all these tools, do you think there's a risk that we lose sight of how to get feel
Yeah, I
something is
guess so.
natural?
Hmm. Yeah, but there is a risk, certainly. But then you could say that, meditation is a technique. If you use a mantra in meditation, you're using it as a technique to quieten your mind and to move into a state of mental calmness. So it's just a technique like a mantra, really. There's
Yeah,
ideally, you shouldn't need a mantra. You should just be able to move into a state of mental quietness straight away.
yeah, that's a really good
But that
point.
but that's tricky because our lives can be quite stressful. The stress in our lives can agitate our minds, which can make our thoughts become quite busy.
Right.
So if we were able to spontaneously move into a state of mental calmness, that would be wonderful. But
Yeah.
I don't think there's any problem with using techniques to help us to do that.
Right. So it's like, how do we use tools and techniques, whether it's a mantra or a muse or a heart math monitor,
Mm,
biofeedback as a way of getting back to a state of oneness? Okay,
yeah.
interesting. All right, so you talked about it explained near-death experiences, which you've covered. Talk about the psychic experiences, and I think you touched upon it briefly that you were saying that, hey, how else can one person do remote viewing, which is a process where people can actually be connected to someone in a different location and tell them what their location looks like. Like, how else would that
Yeah.
be explained? Is that what you meant by psychic, or what? Tell me a little bit about what you meant.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about things like precognition, when we
Mm-hmm.
can sense what's going to happen or get a glimpse of a future event.
Yeah.
I'm talking about telepathy, which is when
Mm-hmm.
we respond to each other's thoughts. So, maybe we have a strong intuition that something is wrong and somebody is seriously ill.
Right.
Maybe we get it. Maybe it's a dream. Maybe we get a telepathic dream where something happens in a dream and it's some kind of glimpse of a real event which is happening in a different part of the world to someone we know. Yeah, so it's basically also remote viewing as well. So it's precognition, telepathy, and clairvoyance or remote viewing. Also, maybe psychokinesis, which is when mental intentions can affect physical objects. You can stop the hand of a watch moving, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's more rare, and that's probably less well established as the other phenomena.
Right.
But from a scientific point of view, if you want to speak in terms of, empirical science, there is actually a lot of evidence that things like telepathy and precognition are real. There's been a lot of studies in recent years that have shown very significant results. And there have been a lot of meta-analyses, which is when you look at hundreds of different experiments over many decades, and you come up with an overall result from all of those experiences, from all of those experiments. So basically all of the research points to the reality of these phenomena. But the problem is that, a lot of mainstream scientists believe that telepathy or precognition and other psi phenomena, they believe that they break the laws of science in some way, which is nonsense, because they don't. They just break the common sense view of reality. They break the kind of naive view of reality which sees us as separate individuals which cannot communicate with each other except through language or touch. They just they contravene the common sense view of time. The naive view that time is completely linear, that the future is over there, the past is over here, and we are just here in the present, and there's no, direct connection or overlap between the three different tenses. But that's nonsense, because going back to quantum physics, in the quantum realm, notions of time become completely, the solidity of time dissolves away. Time does not.
Well, yeah, tell me what that means.
Well, the distinction between the past, future, and present fades away. In the same way that the separateness of objects fades away, the divisions between the boundaries between the future and the past and the present fade away. So they sort of merge into one another. And in the
can you give me a sense of how do quantum physicists know that there is no time?
Well, in some cases, we live in the common sense view is that we live in a world of cause and effect. So the cause happens first, then the effect happens. But in the subatomic realm, that can happen the other way around. So the effects can take place before its cause. It's just reversed. And there's one theory in...
You mean the observation, the theory of the observation will actually, the person observing will actually affect the outcome? Is that what you mean, or something else?
Yeah, well, that's connected to it. But it's, the basic idea is that the normal law of cause and effect can be reversed. In effect, it's almost as if time is running backwards.
Right, so give me an example of that.
Well, there's another theory in quantum physics called the transactional theory. And the theory is that what seems to be happening now is the product of waves that move from the future and waves that move from the past. These quantum waves move together to create the present. So the present is a creation from the future and the past. And it's completely counterintuitive. It doesn't make any sense,
It's
basically.
Transactional. What is that theory called?
It's called the transactional theory.
Huh, okay.
So,
okay.
But I mean,
and they've proven this by how, like, when the quantum physicists look at this and say, yes, there's this transactional theory, the future and the past are coalescing into the present moment. What is it that they're observing in the labs or whatever to suggest this is true?
Well, they're trying to make sense of the strange quantum world where time does not seem to exist in a solid sense. Time seems to be, completely fluid and permeable. So there's no definite point where the present exists. There's no definite now. It's what seems to be now is is a combination of the future and the past brought together into now. So in some sense, the future and the past seem to exist already. The future already exists in the now, and the past still exists in the now. So time, you could say that time is a bit like space. We can see space all around us in every direction. So time in quantum physics, time is like that. It seems to exist like a kind of plateau, if you like, a plateau which has the future on that side, the past on that side, but it's all here now, and it's all accessible now. So it's very similar to what a lot of the mystics said. The mystics who talked about the eternal now, and
interesting. I'm thinking about what I'm doing is I'm thinking about a guess that I had and she was studied precognition, and she had said that she was in the her boyfriend. And again, I apologize, Julie Mossberg, if I'm screwing up the story. But she had said that. Did you know Julia Mossberg?
Yeah, I've had contact with her. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so correct me if you know the story too. She was saying that her boyfriend was ill, really ill, had cancer, and she was very worried about it. And she was gardening, and in the garden, she had this precognition that he was going to be fine. He was going to make it through this. It seemed like really bad, almost terminal cancer, but he miraculously is going to come through. And she told him, "You're going to be fine, so I'm not worrying about this anymore." And she said, what she felt happened is the future her came back to the current her and said, "He's going to be fine."
Hmm.
So that,
Yeah.
and then she like literally had this, I don't know if it was like a knowing that the future her met with, maybe, I don't know if it's a past her, but at least the current her, and knew that her boyfriend
Hmm.
was going to be
Hmm.
fine. And in fact, he was fine. But she had this
Yeah.
inner knowing that she couldn't really explain to anyone, but knew in her heart was correct. So, would that be an example of transactional?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good example. At least it's a very good metaphor to to make sense of the transactional theory. It kind of makes sense in my own life too. I mean, I haven't had any kind of overt experiences which were similar to that. But when I was younger, when I was like a teenager, I
Hmm.
had this really strong impulse that I wanted to be a writer.
Hmm.
It was really, really, really powerful. I started writing at the age of 16,
Hmm.
and I never wanted to be anything else. I always just wanted to be a writer. And like a lot of writers, I had so many disappointments, as rejections from publishers, endless rejections. And I became so disheartened at various points where I just wanted to give up.
Hmm.
But there was always something inside me that said, no, no, this is what you are meant to do. This is what you are going to do. It was almost like a calling from the future. That's what it felt like.
Mm.
And that was pulling me towards a certain path, almost as if the path had already been established. The goal had already been realized, and I was just moving to a goal that was already there. So
Mm.
yeah, that was a similar experience. There was always this kind of inner knowing that it was what I was going to do, and that in the end it would be successful. So I kept doing it.
Well, it's funny because I think what Julia said, I hope I got the story right, is that she literally meditates and goes to her past self saying, "He's going to be all right. He's going to," because she's in the future. She knows
Mm,
he's fine.
mm,
So she imagines now going to her. I don't know. I don't know. It's a pass. It passes everywhere like a plateau. I don't know where to look. But like, let's say the traditional look is the passes here, that you look at your past and she's just like, "He's going to be fine. He's going to be fine." So that in the past, because there is no time that she can actually receive the message. So she literally talks to her past self. I've also had a teacher, and I actually had a guest that last week who was talking about her husband dying and it changing her life. Um,
Oh yeah.
yeah, and what's her name? I can't remember her name. I'm just spacing on her name. But she was so curious about like, where did you go? Where did you go after you died? But where are you? How
Mm,
does this world work? And so she had come up with, it's called "Where Did You Go?" is the name of the book, and she came up with a process for talking to people who've passed on to a different plane of reality. And if you read some of the spiritual texts, they would tell you that there is no different, it's all one reality. It's not like
mm,
there's a different plane of reality. There may, even though they may describe it as seven different worlds, there's all one reality that exists simultaneously together. There is no like going to heaven and going to a different plane, being physically gone. And she had said, "Well, I feel my husband here with me all the time." And I've always thought, "Oh, that's a sweet idea." Like my dad's passed. He's in my heart. He's always with me all the time,
mm,
And then I realized that no, she meant like he's really with her all the time.
mm,
If there isn't any constraint in space or time, then her husband could literally be with her at all times. And she talks to her husband as if he's living at this very moment. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. Would that could that phenomena where she's talking to someone who has passed, if we are
mm.
one, he even in theory he's passed to a different reality, but let's say it's just an energetic reality that's not material anymore. Could it be that she is talking to him, and in fact he's there all the time? I don't know. That was the thing
Yeah,
I was
that's
thinking about today. What do you think?
interesting theory. Yeah, in a sense, it seems viable. But I mean, it moves us into the area of is there life after death? And of course, from a standard scientific point of view, there can't be life after death
Right.
because the mind is produced by the brain. So when the brain dies, the mind also dies, and everything we are dies. Our identity perishes with the body.
Mm-hmm.
But there is, in one of the chapters of my book, I look into the evidence for life after death, and
Mm-hmm.
I think there is quite significant evidence for survival. One significant piece of evidence is encounters with deceased people. So it's not uncommon for not just for people to sense that the people they've lost are with them, as you were describing, but also to sometimes they smell their perfume, they smell their the smell of their hair that they're familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they have a vision of the person as if they're still alive. It could be in a dream, which is so real and so convincing that they're convinced that it was a real communication with the person. And there's also evidence from mediums. There have been a lot of mediums probably are charlatans who are just faking it, but there are some genuine mediums who've participated in very rigorous, controlled scientific experiments, and they've had very positive results. They've managed to glean very specific information about deceased people that was way too specific to be random, and
Right.
which was later confirmed by relatives or friends of deceased people.
So
One
it's
of the
just
what
anecdotal story. It's not necessarily spiritual. Like, what was the evidence that you have, or is it just the story after story of mediums and other people and these controlled? Is that the scientific evidence that's
Well,
available?
no, no. The scientific evidence is that if you have a very skilled medium, a
Mm-hmm.
medium will say that they are in contact with a spirit, and the spirit will give them information. It will tell them about its life. It will tell them information about their physical appearance, about what happened in their life, about their relatives, about their family. So they'll build a whole kind of picture, whole kind of portrait about this individual. And this
Mm.
individual will say, I am the father of so and so. So if they're able to contact the person that the relative of the person of the spirit they've encountered, then the information can be validated. People will determine whether it's specific or not. So there have been, a lot of experiments where the information has been so detailed, incredibly detailed and specific, that it's been verified. And sometimes the information is passed to a panel of independent judges who also validate it or judge the evidence, whether it's valid or not.
Mm.
So, it's as scientific as you can be. It's as rigorous as you can be.
Right. Like, because
Yeah.
how else? What's up? What else is the likelihood that this person would have all these detailed
Yeah,
information?
sometimes the details are just too accurate. I
Yeah.
mean, one theory is that it could be down to telepathy, that you're
Yeah.
you're you're
Oh,
in
that's
you're in
interesting.
telepathic. Yeah, that's one theory. But you know, again, that's a possibility. But I think
Right.
the evidence is quite significant for
Yeah.
survival.
Yeah. That's interesting. I I one time was sitting in a circle with people. They were all mediums. I'm like, I'm not a medium, nor do I want to be a medium, and I'm out. Like I just like I'm done. I'm not gonna. But and when we were sitting in, but I am highly psychic, so I can pick up stuff. And I said, well, this time I got this message, and it was for my friend Celeste. And I said, okay, I think I was talking to your mother, and she was saying that you used to have a little sailor suit. Like it was a suit that you wore, and you used to pretend that you're like sailing a ship. I don't know. Like it just seemed like some random thing. Like I can't even make it up because it's just so weird. And she's like, Yes, I did have a sailor suit that I used to wear when I was a little kid. Like, how can I make these things up? So I know I
Mm,
contacted
mm.
someone, whether it's telepathic or I'm not sure, but I did. How else would I get that detail of, a
Yeah.
little kid, you
Mm,
had a sailor suit and you used to pretend you're a captain of the ship. Like, how else would I know? But it's almost as
mm, mm.
if I think when mediums talk to people who've passed, they give them information like that so that there's proof that this is really an authentic communication with someone who's passed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the most amazing cases was a medium who said she was in contact with a chess player, a kind of
Mm.
deceased grandmaster chess player.
Wow. Okay.
So through the medium, this chess grandmaster, this dead chess player, played matches with living chess players, and he played at the level of a grandmaster. So
Wow.
that was amazing, and at the same time, this spirit gave incredibly detailed information. So they were able to verify who this person was. He was a Hungarian chess player from the
Wow.
1890s who died
Wait,
about
wait.
1890.
So this person was able to channel this guy, play chess on his behalf against
Yeah,
other true chess masters, and
exactly.
was
Yeah,
able to replicate his moves, or I'm sure they're
yeah,
probably signature moves. Wow, that's cool. That's really cool. Now,
yeah.
how else can you explain something like that?
No, you can't explain it
Yeah,
except by saying that that once consciousness comes into our bodies through our brain, and once our individual identity is created, then in some way it becomes permanent. Even when the body fades away, even when the brain stops functioning, that identity continues. It's like an imprint, you could say. It's like an imprint
yeah,
of a human being,
yeah,
and it can continue when the body disintegrates.
yeah. It's funny. My spiritual teacher, it's the tantric Shaivite tradition, but he has the
Oh yeah.
same values or beliefs as probably a lot of other religions. And he had this prediction that he was going to like live until he was 100. And I said, so, or like, what's that like to feel like to know someone psychic told you that you're going to live till 100? Does that make you live your life any differently? And he said, it doesn't really matter whether I'm here or in the other plane of the reality. What's the difference? And I thought, whoa, like that's someone
Mhm.
who's truly actually in a place of non-duality or
Yeah.
oneness,
Yeah.
because whether he's dead on this plane of reality, it doesn't matter because he'll just be in some other plane of reality still the same
Yeah.
Swami. Here or there doesn't matter. And that's literally is
No.
like, I don't think about death because what does it matter? It's just like, an ice cube turning into water. It's
Mm.
just two
Mm.
different states from the
Yeah.
same source. And I
It's just
thought,
moving to a different place.
yeah, and I thought, what if, I mean, that literally, I was like awestruck, like, okay, like, this
Mm.
guy is either seriously drunk the Kool-Aid or he's having experiences where he knows that
Mm.
death doesn't matter because it's just
No.
a change of state. All
Yeah,
right.
it's like the great poet Walt Whitman. The great American poet Walt Whitman. He said
Yeah.
in one of his poems, "Many people suppose it's lucky to be born, but I say it's just as lucky to die." That's what he said.
Yeah, you're just following a different, in theory, according to people who have talked to dead people, I don't know, but
Mm.
they say that it's just a different, it's the same plane of reality. It's not like
Mm.
someone goes up into the sky and goes into heaven. There are people, you know, there are energies around us, of which include people who are on this earth that have passed, but are on this earth. We just can't see them. And it's like, whoa.
Mm. Yeah.
And
Mm.
that when you pass, you just change into a different state. I mean, I'm not at that point where I can actually experience it, but I find the whole thing just fascinating. Um,
Mm. Mm.
Anyways, I want to in the next minute tell me a little bit about your website and your show us your book again and your future work and upcoming events that you have going on there in Manchester or at
Yeah.
Leeds Beckett University.
Yeah, I live in Manchester and I work at Leeds Beckett University. So yeah, this is my book again, Spiritual Science, and my website is stephenmtaylor.com. That's Stephen with a V,
Hmm.
M for Mark, stephenmtaylor.com. And I do talks regularly in the UK. I occasionally go to the US. I was in the US last year, so I sometimes do talks and workshops in the US. But the best place is to go to my website and just to check out my latest activities there.
Right. So it's Stephen, Stevenm, as in Mike, or what? Or I don't know what your middle name is.
Mark,
Mark
Mark.
Taylor,
Mm,
Taylor.com. Thank you
yeah.
so
So
much for being here.
you're welcome. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah,
Thank
great
you.
talking to you too.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. Would love your support in any way by giving me comments below, or to subscribe to the show, or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.